What began as a wealthy woman's casual jest at an elegant fundraiser became a life-changing moment when a humble hotel worker accepted her challenge and delivered a performance that left everyone speechless. The Crystal Bay Hotel's ballroom sparkled with overhead lights that danced across the polished marble surfaces, creating golden reflections that enhanced the already magnificent atmosphere. Elegantly dressed attendees in flowing gowns and perfectly fitted formal wear circulated among tables draped in pristine white cloth. The gentle buzz of refined conversation mingled with the soft tinkling of crystal champagne flutes. Against the far wall sat a somewhat weathered baby grand piano, appearing almost modest amid the surrounding luxury. Sabrina Lockridge, a 41-year-old socialite, commanded attention at the heart of a gathering of philanthropists and media members, dressed in a stunning emerald gown that drew every eye. Her hair fell in gentle waves, and her smile was precisely calculated for the photographers present. Renowned for her theatrical personality and talent for transforming ordinary moments into newsworthy events, she was completely in her zone. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the piano's surface as she surveyed the crowd surrounding her. "You realize," she declared, her voice projecting just far enough for nearby listeners, "if someone here can perform flawlessly on this piano, I'll wed them by tomorrow." The statement wasn't meant to be taken at face value, particularly not at such a formal charity event. Gentle laughter rippled through the group, comfortable and almost patronizing. Several guests shared knowing looks that seemed to say typical Sabrina. A handful of journalists perked up, mentally cataloging the comment for potential quotes. At the room's periphery, Khalil Brantley was replenishing water pitchers. The 27-year-old was the hotel's newest janitor, having been employed there for merely 8 months. He moved with unassuming grace from table to table, practically invisible. However, upon hearing Sabrina's declaration, he froze mid-motion. Setting down his pitcher, he approached the piano and spoke with enough volume for the immediate group to hear. "Are you being sincere?" His question sliced through the laughter, causing heads to pivot. Sabrina looked at him with surprise, not because of his question, but due to who had posed it. His was a face she recognized the way one knows background workers, familiar yet nameless. "I believe I am," she responded, cocking her head with an amused expression. "Are you planning to try out?" A wave of entertainment passed through the gathering. Someone murmured, "This should be fascinating." Another donor chuckled quietly, clearly anticipating a brief spectacle. Khalil offered no return smile. Instead, he moved closer, letting one hand glide over the piano's worn edge. "If your words are genuine," he said steadily, "then let's discover how genuine you truly are." The atmosphere shifted subtly, not enough to silence the amusement, but sufficient to draw people closer. A reporter lifted their device. One hotel supervisor stepped nearer, possibly prepared to intervene if the situation became uncomfortable. Sabrina, relishing the sudden focus, gestured toward the bench. "Please," she said, "demonstrate your abilities." Khalil set aside his work supplies and settled onto the bench. His uniform, a navy shirt bearing the hotel's embroidered logo, looked incongruous against the polished black instrument. He inhaled deeply, positioned his fingers on the keys, and paused momentarily. Several onlookers exchanged doubtful glances. One gentleman muttered, "This will end quickly." Another leaned toward his companion, whispering, "I'll wager 30 seconds." But Khalil appeared oblivious to their skepticism, or perhaps simply indifferent. His focus remained on the keyboard. His opening notes were measured and deliberate, almost as if testing the instrument's voice. The sound wasn't flawless, but he adapted instinctively, his touch both careful and confident. Within moments, the melody began transforming. His fingers accelerated, each note connecting to the next with a fluidity that contradicted his job description and work attire. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The laughter disappeared entirely. Even those who had been absorbed in their phones lowered them unconsciously. What had begun as a room filled with polite amusement was gradually becoming something completely unexpected, something no one had foreseen when the evening started. But the real tension didn't break until the whispers began. And these weren't the kind accompanied by laughter anymore. It began softly, just a few murmurs from the back of the semicircle around the piano. A woman adorned with pearls leaned toward her spouse and whispered, "He likely knows only one piece." Her husband smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on Khalil's hands, as if anticipating a mistake. Near the buffet, 2 young men in tailored suits exchanged smirks. One, clutching a partially empty champagne glass, muttered, "What are the odds he plays something elementary like chopsticks and calls it finished?" Both chuckled without attempting to hide their amusement. Khalil's expression remained unchanged. He kept his eyes on the keys, shoulders loose, his upper body swaying gently with the rhythm as though he existed in his own universe. The music was rich, warm, and far more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. Yet the comments persisted, though with diminishing certainty. "Where did he acquire this skill?" questioned a middle-aged man, frowning slightly. "Probably online tutorials," someone replied with a light laugh, but the conviction was lacking. Sabrina, leaning against the piano, attempted to maintain her smirk. Her comment had been intended as harmless banter, conversation starter, not a genuine challenge. But now, with each passing measure, she found herself examining Khalil more intently. His posture, the control in his touch, the way he paused just enough to let the room breathe before diving into another passage. "Impressive," she said casually, loud enough for those nearby, "but let's see if you can maintain that level for more than 60 seconds. Khalil didn't respond verbally. Instead, his left hand shifted into deep, resonant chord progressions while his right hand danced across the higher keys with light, almost playful precision. The melody grew more complex, weaving patterns that appeared effortless yet demanded considerable skill. The young man with champagne raised his eyebrows. "Okay, definitely not chopsticks." From across the room, a hotel chef in whites emerged from behind the service entrance. He leaned against the door frame, arms folded, eyes locked on Khalil. Several waiters, still carrying trays, slowed their pace to observe. It wasn't just the wealthy patrons who were captivated now, the staff had taken notice too. One woman in a navy sequin dress turned to Sabrina. "He's genuinely talented. Remarkably so." Sabrina waved dismissively, still trying to appear unaffected. "Talent exists everywhere," she said, but the edge in her voice revealed that she hadn't expected this level of skill. Khalil, meanwhile, transitioned into a section blending a soft, melancholy melody with sudden bursts of intensity. It was the kind of performance that stirred emotions even if you couldn't identify the piece. The notes didn't merely fill the space, they seemed to permeate it, transforming the atmosphere until it became impossible to ignore. Yet from the crowd's edge, a man in charcoal gray muttered, "He probably can't even read music." The remark was quiet, but Khalil heard it. He didn't look up or break tempo, but his right hand climbed higher on the keyboard, striking a clear, ringing note before spiraling back into the melody. A woman in the front row, arms crossed, tilted her head. "Where did you learn to play like this?" she inquired. Khalil finally spoke, his voice even. "Not from here." The response drew some chuckles, but not mocking ones this time. It was the kind of reaction people give when they sense an untold story they suddenly want to hear. Sabrina tapped the lid again, this time without her earlier smugness. "Very well, surprise us," she said, as if attempting to regain control of a situation she had initiated but no longer directed. Khalil's hands moved faster now, cascading through runs that seemed to challenge the instrument itself. His foot pressed the sustain pedal at precisely the right moments, allowing the harmonies to linger before shifting them into something new. The murmurs faded. The smirks vanished. Even the man in charcoal gray had straightened his posture, no longer commenting. Sabrina crossed her arms, studying him as if measuring him against some invisible standard. But the real transformation occurred when the first person in the crowd stopped viewing him as a novelty and started seeing him as an artist. Khalil's fingers moved across the keys as though they belonged there, each movement purposeful yet flowing, like water finding its natural course. He no longer performed for the room's occupants. His gaze remained fixed on the piano, but his mind seemed transported elsewhere, to a place only he could access. The piece shifted into a slow, minor key passage that created palpable tension. The lower registers rumbled with depth while the upper notes floated above like fragments of a distant memory. This wasn't merely skill, it was narrative. Every chord felt like a sentence, every run like a paragraph building toward something neither performer nor audience fully grasped until it materialized. Guests who had been standing casually now leaned forward slightly. A woman in crimson clasped her hands before her, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she listened. Even the waitstaff in the back had stopped moving trays and stood motionless, eyes fixed on the piano. Then, without warning, Khalil pivoted. His right hand burst into rapid note clusters, each one sharp and precise, while his left hand provided deep rolling bass lines that felt almost like thunder. The contrast was electrifying, light against dark, gentle against powerful. Sabrina felt her breath catch, though she wouldn't acknowledge it. She had lived surrounded by wealth, power, and influence, but moments this raw, this unfiltered, were rare. She could sense the room's transformation, and it quickened her pulse. From behind the crowd, someone whispered, "That's Rachmaninoff." Another replied, "No, listen carefully. He's combining it with something else." That's original. Khalil's eyes closed briefly as his fingers accelerated, the melody bending and twisting as if testing its own boundaries. The audience couldn't determine if they were hearing a classical piece they should recognize or something entirely new. All they knew was that it was drawing them in. Midway through, his left hand struck a series of chords so powerful the room seemed to vibrate. The sustained pedal caught the resonance, and for a moment, it felt like the music wasn't just in the air, it was in the floor beneath their feet. Sabrina shifted her stance, crossing one ankle over the other, and whispered to the woman beside her, "I didn't expect him to be this skilled." The woman only nodded, her eyes still locked on Khalil. He transitioned again, softening into a gentle, almost lullaby-like tune. It was intimate, delicate even, like something you might overhear through a door late at night. It made the silence between notes feel as significant as the notes themselves. People held their breath unconsciously, afraid that even the smallest sound might shatter whatever was occurring. Then, with a subtle lift of his hands, Khalil brought the piece back to life. The melody climbed higher and higher, the underlying chords growing more insistent, more urgent. It was as if he were racing toward something only he could perceive. In the front row, a man in his 60s lowered his phone. He had been recording since Khalil began, but now, for the first time, he simply wanted to listen without a screen between them. Khalil's final sequence was nothing short of breathtaking. His right hand spun out rapid arpeggios while his left hand hammered a counter-rhythm that felt like the piece's heartbeat. His shoulders moved with emotion, but never carelessly. Every part of him was in complete control. When the last note arrived, it didn't simply stop. It hung in the air momentarily, the piano's natural resonance holding on before finally releasing. Khalil's hands rested on the keys, his head slightly bowed, as if allowing the moment to breathe before anyone dared to speak. There was no polite applause this time. The room exploded with cheers, whistles, and clapping that lasted longer than any toast of the evening. Some guests rose without thinking. Others simply stared at him as if uncertain what they had just witnessed. Sabrina applauded along, but her mind was already racing. She had issued a challenge expecting laughter and a quick conclusion. Instead, she had just watched a janitor command a room full of millionaires and leave them astounded. She stepped forward, her voice softer now. "That wasn't what I anticipated," she said, her eyes searching his face for something she couldn't identify. Khalil finally looked at her, his expression calm. "Most memorable things aren't," he replied. A murmur of approval passed through the crowd, not loud, but genuine. But the real conversation was only beginning, and it wouldn't remain confined to this ballroom for long. The applause didn't so much fade as it was overtaken by conversations erupting in every corner of the room. People leaned toward each other, voices hushed but animated, as if they'd just witnessed something they weren't quite sure how to process. Sabrina remained near the piano, still trying to decipher Khalil. She had built a career and public image around controlling narratives. Yet now she could feel this story slipping from her grasp and into his. A woman in her 50s, wearing a silver wrap over her gown, approached the piano. "Young man," she said, smiling warmly, "where did you learn to perform like that?" Khalil rested his hands in his lap. "At home," he said simply. "Old upright my mother purchased for $50 from a church down the street. Keys were damaged, some didn't function, but it was sufficient for self-teaching." The woman's smile grew tender. "Well, it was effective." From the side, a man in formal wear interjected with a tone half curious, half dismissive. "So, no professional instruction, no music school, just figured it out yourself?" Khalil glanced at him briefly. "Self-discovery is the instruction," he said. The comment drew a small laugh from someone in the back, and even Sabrina cracked a smile at that. Then came the hotel's general manager, an older man with salt and pepper hair, who placed a hand on Khalil's shoulder. "You've been employed here how long?" 8 months, Khalil replied. "And you've been concealing this talent the entire time?" "I wasn't concealing anything," Khalil said steadily. "Nobody ever inquired." That answer landed more heavily than expected. Several people shifted uncomfortably, as if they'd just been reminded of something they preferred not to acknowledge. Sabrina tilted her head. "You know, I think you've just made me violate my own principle." "What principle?" Khalil asked. "Never allow myself to be overshadowed at my own function." There was laughter at that, but it was good-natured now. The smirks and whispered jokes had disappeared, replaced with something closer to respect, or at least curiosity. A reporter from the Charlotte Observer stepped forward, her phone extended. "Khalil, can I get a brief video of you stating your name and hometown? This is going to receive significant attention." Khalil hesitated. I'd prefer the video speak for itself. The reporter seemed surprised but nodded and stepped back. From behind the crowd, a voice called out, "Play another piece." Several others echoed the request, and for a moment, it seemed he might comply. But Khalil shook his head gently. One was sufficient. Sabrina studied him for another beat before saying, "Then I suppose you'll leave everyone here wondering." He rose from the bench, and people instinctively parted to create a path. A few guests reached out to shake his hand. Others offered compliments, some sincere, some more performative, but Khalil accepted them all with the same calm nod. Sabrina watched him cross the ballroom toward the service hallway. For a woman accustomed to commanding rooms, it was rare to see someone else claim that authority without even attempting to do so. She couldn't determine if it irritated or impressed her. Near the doorway, a young waiter caught up to Khalil. "Man, I had no idea you played. That was incredible." Khalil smiled faintly. "It's just something I've always done." Something that sounded like a lifetime's work. Khalil didn't respond immediately. He adjusted the strap on his cleaning supplies and said, "Perhaps it is." Then he vanished into the hallway, the heavy doors swinging closed behind him. Back at the piano, Sabrina rested her hand on the lid. The room continued buzzing with guests discussing him, the performance, and inevitably the fact that the person who had just stolen the evening was the hotel's janitor. She knew the clip would be online before she reached home. A man beside her leaned in. "You realize this is going viral, right?" "I'd be shocked if it hasn't already," she replied. But what none of them knew yet was that the conversation beyond these walls would grow much louder than anything said within them. By the time Sabrina's driver arrived to take her to her high-rise apartment, her phone was already vibrating continuously. Messages from colleagues, social media notifications, and 2 missed calls from her publicist filled the screen. One of the first messages read, "Is this your gala? The piano guy." It came with a link to a video already posted on Twitter. The clip was unpolished, shaky, clearly captured from a guest's phone, but it documented everything: the moment Khalil sat down, the skeptical chuckles, the way the room fell silent, and then the thunderous applause. In under 3 hours, it had accumulated over 300,000 views. By morning, it would reach millions. On Instagram, the hashtags were proliferating: #PianoJanitor, #HiddenGenius, #Khalil Brantley. Some posts celebrated him as a prodigy who demonstrated that genuine talent doesn't require a stage to be discovered. Others were more pointed, focusing attention on how the guests had initially treated him. A popular TikTok creator had already stitched the clip with commentary, "You can see the exact moment the wealthy people realized they underestimated him." The video was drawing thousands of comments, many tagging friends with messages like, "Watch this completely. Worth it." By 10 a.m. the following day, Khalil's name was trending on Twitter alongside international news headlines. A screenshot of Sabrina's stunned expression during the performance was circulating widely. Someone had captioned it, "When you challenge the wrong person." Meanwhile, Khalil was at home in his small apartment above a laundromat on Beechwood Avenue. He had an old laptop on his kitchen table, its screen glowing with unread notifications. A high school friend had messaged, "Dude, you're everywhere right now. You need to launch a YouTube channel or something." Khalil sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had never pursued fame, and the prospect of suddenly becoming a public figure felt odd. Music had always been personal, something he shared with a few friends, maybe an occasional open mic night. Now it was being analyzed by strangers worldwide. Back at the Crystal Bay Hotel, the general manager was handling media requests. Local news stations wanted interviews. National outlets were calling. Even a morning talk show in Los Angeles had reached out. Sabrina, sipping her coffee in her living room, took a call from her publicist. "This is an opportunity," the woman said briskly. "You need to get ahead of this. People love the clip, but some are criticizing how the room initially reacted. You need to respond. Show that you're supportive." "I am supportive," Sabrina replied. "I told him to play. I didn't prevent him." "That's not how the internet functions," her publicist said dryly. "We should arrange for you and Khalil to meet publicly. A photo opportunity. Maybe a follow-up performance." Sabrina stared out the window at the skyline. "He's not a publicity tool. If he wants to meet, fine. If not, I won't force it." Khalil, meanwhile, was scrolling through comments on one of the viral posts. Most were kind, but some were cynical, suggesting it was a setup, questioning whether he had staged the performance for attention. Later that afternoon, a journalist from the Charlotte Ledger called him. "Khalil, people want to know, do you plan to pursue music full-time now?" I haven't decided, he said. I enjoy playing, always have, but I don't think a viral video should determine my life path. The reporter paused. What do you want people to learn from all this? That you don't know someone just by appearances, Khalil replied. And maybe that talent doesn't come with a uniform requirement. By that evening, the clip had reached national television. A news anchor introduced it as the performance that halted a gala in its tracks. Footage of Khalil playing aired alongside commentary from music critics and social media personalities. At the hotel, guests from the previous night were calling staff to discuss the moment. Some claimed they had immediately recognized his skill, though the video clearly suggested otherwise. Others wanted to know if he'd be performing again. Sabrina knew the story had already grown beyond her influence. Her inbox was full of invitations to appear on panels about hidden talent and class perception, but she also knew the only person who could decide what happened next was Khalil himself. But the real shift wasn't in view counts or headlines. It was in the fact that for the first time, people were asking who Khalil really was. And that question was about to lead somewhere neither of them expected. 2 days after the gala, Khalil found himself sitting at a small table in a quiet corner of Marlowe's coffee house, a spot just off Main Street where the morning rush had long passed. He had agreed to meet Sabrina, not in front of cameras, not at the hotel, but here. She had insisted on keeping it low-key, saying she wanted to talk without an audience. She arrived 5 minutes late, sliding into the chair opposite him with an apologetic smile. "Traffic," she said, setting her leather bag on the floor. Khalil nodded. "No problem." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of the espresso machine and the faint hum of soft jazz filled the gap. Then Sabrina leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I owe you an apology," she said plainly. "That night, I turned you into entertainment without even thinking about it, and you transformed the whole thing into something I couldn't have predicted." Khalil's eyes remained steady on hers. "I didn't do it to prove you wrong." "I know," she said, "which makes it even more embarrassing for me." He let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. "You were just talking. People say things without realizing how they sound. I've been on the receiving end of that before." Sabrina stirred the coffee she just ordered, the spoon tapping lightly against the cup. "Your playing, it wasn't just good. It was lived in, like you've been carrying it for years." "I have," Khalil said. "Started when I was 10. My mom found that old piano at a church sale. She didn't play, but she figured I might. Guess she was right." "What about lessons?" "Couldn't afford them. I learned by listening, copying, making mistakes, and trying again. Sometimes I'd sneak into the community center on Saturday mornings. They had a decent upright. I'd play until the janitor kicked me out." Sabrina smiled faintly. "And now you're the janitor." Khalil grinned. "Yeah, funny how that works." Her expression softened. "Why not pursue it professionally?" Khalil leaned back, fingers curling around his coffee mug. "Life happened. My mom got sick when I was 17. Bills accumulated. Music doesn't pay much unless you get really lucky or know the right people. I took jobs that kept the lights on. Piano stayed in the picture, but it's always been mine. Private." Sabrina nodded slowly, as if turning his words over in her mind. "The thing is, that performance meant something to people. I've had messages from strangers saying it reminded them of their father, their childhood, their own dreams they'd abandoned." He looked out the window at the street. "That's nice, but I don't want this to turn into some viral charity case. I'm not looking for someone to rescue me." "I'm not offering to rescue you," she said. "I'm asking if you want a stage, the kind you deserve." Khalil's gaze returned to her. "And if I don't?" "Then nothing changes," she said with a shrug. "You keep playing when you want, where you want, but you've got an opening right now that most people never get. If you say yes, I can put you in front of audiences who will actually listen." He didn't answer right away. His mind drifted back to his mother, to the old chipped piano in their living room, to the way she used to hum along while folding laundry. She'd tell him, "You're telling stories without words." She would have wanted him to share those stories. Still, he wasn't sure if that meant letting the world in. Sabrina seemed to read his hesitation. "I'm not going to pressure you, but think about this, your music already spoke for you in a room full of people who weren't listening. Imagine what it could do for people who are." Khalil set his cup down. "I'll consider it." They talked a little longer, not just about the gala, but about her foundation, his work at the hotel, and the strange way life sometimes handed you a spotlight when you weren't seeking one. When they finally stood to leave, Sabrina extended her hand. Whatever you decide, you have my respect. That's not something I give lightly. Khalil shook her hand. I'll keep that in mind. But what neither of them realized was that the decision he was wrestling with would be made for him sooner than he thought, because the world wasn't finished knocking at his door. 3 days later, Khalil was back at the Crystal Bay Hotel, pushing his cleaning cart through the banquet hallway when the hotel's front desk clerk hurried toward him. "You've got a visitor," she said, slightly out of breath. "I'm working," Khalil replied, but she shook her head. "This one's not leaving until you speak with her." When he stepped into the lobby, a woman in her late 30s, wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying a toddler on her hip, turned to face him. Her eyes lit up. "You don't know me," she began, "but I watched your video, twice, actually. My son here doesn't speak much yet, but when I played your piano clip, he sat still and listened the entire time. That never happens." Khalil glanced at the boy, who was now watching him with wide eyes. "That's nice to hear." The woman's voice trembled. "It's more than nice. My husband passed last year, and we've been adjusting. That music, it was the first time in months my home felt peaceful. I just wanted to say thank you. I know you didn't do it for us, but it mattered." He stood there for a moment, not sure what to say. Finally, he offered a quiet, "I'm glad it found you when you needed it." After she left, Khalil wheeled his cart back toward the service hallway, but something had shifted. Until then, the viral video had felt like something happening to him. Now it felt like something he might actually have a say in. That evening, he called Sabrina. "If the offer is still available," he said, "I'll take the stage." 2 weeks later, they stood together backstage at the Uptown Theater in Dallas. Sabrina had arranged for him to perform as the featured act at her foundation's national benefit concert. The audience was a mix of donors, local families, and a few reporters eager to see if the piano janitor could live up to the hype. Khalil paced lightly, his palms warm. "Feels different than the gala," he said. "Because this time they came for you," Sabrina replied. When his name was announced, he stepped into the spotlight, greeted by applause that was already warmer than the polite clapping he'd faced at the hotel. He sat at the gleaming Steinway on stage, took a breath, and began to play. The first piece was his own composition, a blend of gospel warmth and classical precision, with melodies that swelled like ocean tides. The theater grew silent, the kind of silence that's heavy with attention. When the final note faded, the applause was immediate and full. Between pieces, he spoke briefly to the audience. "Most people will only ever know you from what they can see in a few seconds. That's not the complete story. It never is. We all carry something bigger inside us. Sometimes you just need the right moment to let it out." He played for nearly 40 minutes, ending with the same piece from the gala. This time the reaction was even louder, standing ovation and all. In the wings, Sabrina was applauding, a genuine smile on her face. Afterward, as guests mingled in the lobby, people approached him, not just to compliment the music, but to share their own stories of instruments left in attics, of dreams set aside for practical reasons, of talents they'd stopped believing were worth anything. By the end of the night, Khalil realized the music had become more than his private refuge. It was now a bridge between himself and people he'd never met. Outside the theater, Sabrina caught up to him. "You know, you could make this a career if you wanted." "Maybe," Khalil said. "But even if I don't, I've learned something." "What's that?" "That what you carry matters. Even if no one sees it right away, even if they laugh first." He paused, looking back at the theater doors where the last few guests were leaving. "Sometimes the right moment comes when you're not asking for it, but you'd better be ready when it does." Sabrina nodded. "Then I guess the rest is up to you." Khalil smiled. "Always has been." The night air was cool as he walked toward the car waiting to take him back to his hotel. He didn't know if this was the start of something big or just a story he'd tell years from now. But he knew one thing for certain, his music wasn't staying hidden anymore. If you've been holding on to something you love, whether it's music, writing, painting, or anything else, don't wait for the perfect stage. Share it. Let it be seen. You never know whose life it might change, including your own.